Unexpectedly, a powerful and deeply personal revelation has shaken both the sports and media worlds, drawing attention to a long-ignored dynamic that's rarely spoken of publicly, until now. Alexandra Cooper, the fearless and unapologetic host of the hit podcast Call Her Daddy, has stepped into a new role, not just as a cultural voice for young women, but as a whistleblower confronting a painful chapter from her past. On June 8th, Cooper went public with allegations of sexual harassment against her former college athletic coach, a figure of authority who she claims repeatedly crossed boundaries during her time as a student athlete. The allegations were made during a highly emotional segment of her podcast, where Cooper broke down in tears while describing the years of discomfort, guilt, and internal conflict she endured in silence. The moment resonated immediately with her millions of listeners, sparking a massive wave of support and scrutiny. What began as a candid personal story quickly became a viral flashpoint, generating headlines across major news outlets and igniting fierce online debate about power, gender, and trauma within female sports teams. For years, society has largely framed conversations about harassment through the lens of male aggressors and female victims. But Cooper's story challenges that binary, revealing a more nuanced, uncomfortable truth. Abuse of power can manifest in many forms, and sometimes from those we least expect. Her coach, whose name has not yet been publicly confirmed, was described by Cooper as trusted, respected, and protected by the institution, making the environment for disclosure feel impossible at the time. She recalls being praised one moment and uncomfortably touched the next, often under the pretense of motivation or mentorship, gestures that left her feeling paralyzed and confused. Cooper's decision to share her experience came, she says, not for shock value or virality, but to finally reclaim a piece of her own story that had been buried under shame. I felt like I had no voice, she confessed. And the worst part is, I didn't even know how to name what was happening to me. In that moment, her voice cracked, and with it, so did the illusion that strong, outspoken women like her are immune to being silenced. With her massive platform, Cooper has now created an unfiltered space for dialogue, pushing listeners and institutions to reevaluate how they respond when the predator doesn't fit the usual profile. Already, her alma mater has issued a brief, vague statement saying they take such matters very seriously. But critics argue that's not nearly enough. What's emerging isn't just a story about one woman's pain, it's a confrontation with a much broader discomfort. How many others stayed silent because their truth didn't look like the ones we're used to hearing? As Cooper speaks, a long overdue conversation is beginning to echo beyond the mic, and the world is finally listening. Beneath the applause that followed Alex Cooper's brave revelation lies a much more disturbing undercurrent, one that exposes just how deeply rooted and overlooked power imbalances can be, even in spaces designed to empower young women. As her story spread across headlines, a wave of mixed reactions began to surface, both from the public and from institutions tied to her past. While many fans and survivors flooded social media with messages of support, validating their own experiences through her courage, others began questioning the timing, the motives, and even the truth of her claims. Critics asked why she waited so long to speak, why she didn't name the coach directly, and why she chose a podcast rather than a formal complaint. But that line of questioning only emphasized the problem. For years, women in sports have quietly endured not just physical strain and performance pressure, but uncomfortable, often humiliating encounters with authority figures who wield control over their futures. And when the abuser is a woman, a coach revered for building female athletes, the discomfort multiplies and the silence becomes suffocating. Cooper's University, facing mounting pressure, issued a second statement within 24 hours of the first, this time announcing an internal review into past conduct within its women's athletic department. Yet no name was mentioned. No timeline offered, no visible accountability. To many, it felt like the institution was doing damage control, not seeking truth. Meanwhile, anonymous sources from within the university began leaking fragments of internal communications, suggesting that complaints of inappropriate conduct had circulated years ago, only to be handled internally and eventually dismissed. These whispers pointed to a disturbing possibility, that Cooper's experience may not have been isolated, but part of a broader pattern quietly tolerated behind closed doors. The backlash intensified when a former teammate, initially unnamed, spoke to a small online outlet under anonymity, corroborating elements of Cooper's story. She described the same coach using manipulative praise, fostering dependence among young players, and blurring lines between mentorship and personal intrusion. The teammate, like Cooper, never reported it at the time. "We didn't have language for it," she said. "And even if we did, no one would have believed us." With every word, the facade of institutional innocence cracked further. Cooper, meanwhile, didn't back down. On her next podcast episode, she doubled down, not with rage, but with clarity. "I'm not here to ruin lives," she said. "I'm here to stop a cycle that never should have started." Her calm defiance struck a chord with listeners, especially young women navigating power dynamics in competitive fields. Yet the media frenzy continued, with talk shows, opinion columns, and sports analysts dissecting her motives, her credibility, and her impact. What began as a revelation had now become a cultural battleground, a test not only of one woman's truth, but of society's readiness to confront predators who don't match the villain archetype. And still, the coach at the center of it all remained silent. That silence, to many, spoke volumes. Then, the momentum exploded into an uncontainable wave. As the story gained global traction, Alex Cooper's revelation triggered a ripple effect, one that reached far beyond her podcast and into the heart of collegiate athletics, institutional responsibility, and public consciousness. On June 11th, just days after her initial disclosure, 3 additional former players from the same university team independently contacted investigative reporters, sharing eerily similar accounts of emotional manipulation, invasive behavior, and unwanted physical contact by the same coach. These women, who had not spoken to Cooper prior, described moments that mirrored her story almost verbatim. Coaching sessions where personal boundaries were ignored, team bonding exercises that devolved into uncomfortable interactions, and a culture of silence enforced by fear of losing scholarships or playing time. Their statements, now on record, validated Cooper's experience beyond personal testimony. It was no longer one woman's word, it was now a documented pattern. Almost overnight, the university's tone shifted. Faced with mounting evidence and national outrage, the school suspended the coach pending a full investigation. The athletic department's official website went offline for 24 hours, and previously, public records were suddenly removed. Meanwhile, calls for accountability surged across social media, with hashtags like #ProtectWomenAthletes and #BelieveAlex trending globally. Student-led protests broke out on campus, with athletes from various teams standing in solidarity, holding signs that read, "Your silence is violence," and "We deserve safe spaces." The university president, under pressure from alumni, media, and donors, finally addressed the situation in a live press conference, acknowledging the systemic failures that allowed such conduct to persist unchecked. "We hear you. We believe you. We will act," he said. But the statement, though well-crafted, did little to quell the outrage. In the media, the conversation shifted from individual blame to institutional rot. Experts began weighing in on how gendered expectations within sports often obscure abuse, especially when the aggressor is a woman in a leadership position. One viral editorial titled, "When Power Hides Behind Progress," argued that the illusion of female solidarity in women's sports has sometimes created blind spots where abuse festers quietly. It struck a nerve. Suddenly, former athletes from different universities started coming forward with their own stories, not necessarily tied to Cooper's coach, but eerily similar in theme. The floodgates had opened. Cooper, meanwhile, found herself both praised and targeted. While major news outlets hailed her as a modern-day whistleblower, trolls flooded her comment sections with vitriol, accusing her of seeking attention or trying to destroy another woman's career. But Cooper remained composed, posting a single message on social media. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth, and the courage to speak it." In that moment, her words echoed louder than any headline. The woman who once built a brand on unfiltered honesty had become the face of a movement far more powerful than anything she ever broadcasted, and there was no turning back. The silence had been broken, and what followed was nothing short of a cultural reckoning. Now, as the dust begins to settle, the full weight of Alex Cooper's decision to speak out is finally being understood, not just in the public eye, but in boardrooms, locker rooms, and classrooms across the country. The university that once issued vague, dismissive statements has launched a formal inquiry into its entire athletics program, hiring an independent third-party firm to audit past complaints, review institutional response protocols, and provide recommendations for safeguarding student-athletes. The coach at the center of the controversy has officially resigned, issuing a brief written statement denying any wrongdoing, but expressing a desire to not distract from the mission of collegiate athletics. For many, the statement felt hollow, a final attempt to sidestep accountability. But this time, the exit wasn't quiet. It was stained with public pressure, student activism, and irreversible consequences. Alex Cooper, for her part, has continued to address the subject with grace and determination. In a later podcast episode titled "What Healing Sounds Like," she reflected on the pain of revisiting her trauma, the unexpected wave of solidarity she received, and the criticism that still lingers in certain corners of the internet. "Telling the truth didn't fix the past," she said, "but it gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost: my power." That sentiment struck a deep chord with her listeners, many of whom sent messages detailing their own stories of silent endurance in similar environments. Cooper has since announced a partnership with organizations focused on consent education and athlete safety, leveraging her platform not just to entertain, but to educate and empower. But beyond her personal journey, this story has become something bigger. Athletic departments across the country are now reevaluating their codes of conduct and whistleblower protections. Several schools have created anonymous reporting systems and mandatory training sessions for coaches on boundary setting and professional ethics, policies that, shockingly, had never been formalized in many institutions. The media coverage that began as a tabloid-like sensation has evolved into a more serious, ongoing dialogue about what accountability truly means when power and progress collide. And yet, this reckoning is far from over. As society continues to grapple with complex dynamics of abuse, especially when they don't follow familiar patterns, the need for nuance, empathy, and action becomes increasingly clear. Alex Cooper's story did not end with a headline. It ignited a movement built on uncomfortable truths and the courage to confront them. In the end, the real victory isn't in the resignation of one coach, but in the thousands of women and men who now feel a little less alone, a little more seen, and a lot more willing to raise their voices. Because change doesn't come from silence. It comes from brave souls like Cooper, who choose to speak when it's hardest. And sometimes, a podcast becomes more than just a platform. It becomes a revolution, echoing far beyond the mic, reshaping the very culture that once demanded silence.